Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Lights, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And if you are looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 40 of Breaking Step. Tibs grumbled. Wait, what? Tibs grumbled the congregation reluctantly once everyone. Okay, where are we at here? Okay, they've just played the game of Conquest. Okay. His congratulations reluctantly. Tibbs grumbled his congratulations reluctantly once everyone else, even Mez, congratulated Dawn on guiding them to victory. I don't like it, but can't think really on the fly how to fix it. Dawn had, again, controlled the board, even if it looked for a while like Ganny was maneuvering them into a trap. Dawn had turned it against her, putting her on the defensive for the next 5 moves, which ended with Dawn defeating her lord. Who else but him was good enough to beat the dungeon's most important piece, after all? He ignored the sorcerer's look and checked for traps. He opened it and almost closed it on seeing the content. Was Ganny joking? She wasn't saying anything, but why else would there be a purple sorcerer's robe in there? Had it add the usual enchantment, let it absorb more damage, not break as easily, but the wee felt denser. A stronger version? Let me guess, Dawn said, standing over Tibbs and looking into the chest. I'm too good for this too. Tibbs shoved the robe in the sorcerer's chest. Okay. Sorcerer's arms. Just because we already have chest and it's two different type of chest, I don't want to. Tibbs shoved the robe in the sorcerer's arms before walking away. I'm going to check the way to the next crest, he told the others. If you're going to leave this room, watch where you step. You lock me out, and I can't help whatever trouble you get yourselves into. 3 paces out of the room, and someone followed him. Tibbs spun around, ready to tell Jackal he wasn't in the mood for company. He'd know why he wanted to be alone, but it was Dawn hurrying after him as he put the robe in his pack. I'm part of this team, Dawn said. You aren't leaving me behind. I don't need your help, Tibbs growled. Leave me. You think this is about helping you? The disdain was thick. This is about helping myself. The word glowed. I need you to survive. I need you to survive if we're going to get through all the rooms. Those didn't. Tibbs didn't bother wondering why or what about. Or what? Okay. Or what about? Tibbs didn't bother wondering why or what about. Dawn was lying as he glared at him. He didn't care. The sorcerer was always lying. Maybe best if we all remain together, Kumdar said, joining them, to ensure nothing happens to one of us. Tibbs rolled his eyes at the look the cleric pointed at him. He wasn't going to stab Dawn. Unlike him, Tibbs knew what it meant to be part of a team. The gnolls they encountered next had elements, making the fight harder, and because of Dawn's presence, they had to use up more of the precious healing potions. He couldn't wait for Dawn to convince Tirania he deserved to lead his own team. So Tibbs could find someone he'd trust to replace him. Someone he could tell about Stowe and his multiple elements, so Tibbs could go back to talking with the dungeon during their runs. There was that new Upsilon sorcerer Tibbs had noticed on the training grounds. His eyes were a color Tibbs had never seen before, gray, but with a sheen to them. He wanted to call the color silver, but as with a lot of words used around the elements, it didn't feel correct. Whatever element. Wait, she? So then that's her. Um, Whatever element she had to be more trustworthy than Dawn. Dawn didn't question Tibbs's instruction as they navigated the shifting floor room, but Tibbs felt the suspicious look. The sorcerer also studied the room when Tibbs was instructing someone else on the team, probably looking for a better path than Tibbs had worked out. The chest had a bandolier Tibbs could see attaching knives to. As pointed out, it could instead hold potion bottles. Uh, There were no attacks on the way to the Dragon Crest room, which worried Tibbs. If Ganny hadn't set up attacks getting there, she was planning something else. The Dragon Crest took longer than the others to solve, as usual, because of the complexity of the movements needed to reform it, and Dawn's eyes on him didn't help. He was tempted to let the sorcerer try it and see how easy it was for him, but that would be playing into Dawn's game, and it would cost them the little time they had. Uh, it cost them time. Like, I don't want to say little because this spends a lot longer, so it cost them time. Cost them time from, and it would cause them time from having to relearn the trigger sequence. Cost them time. Cost them more time. Because they're more time already spent relearning the trigger sequence leading here. Don't touch anything, he told Dawn as he stepped into the room. Would I have ever been the one touching something and triggering traps? He didn't look at Jackal, but Tibbs knew who the sorcerer implied. It was a weak attempt at making the others think he was the better leader. He was probably holding in anger that Jackal hadn't gotten himself killed when he tried to open what he thought was a cache and triggered an attack by golem people. Tibbs had seen the trap and ignored it, not expecting anyone else, especially Jackal, to notice it. Tibbs wondered how often Dawn had hoped Jackal would get himself killed in such a manner back when they believed he was trying to be a better person. They might have made him team leader then, and they would have regretted it. At least now, no matter what happened, there was no way any of them would let him take charge. The way to the first chess room, then the second, was the same. They dealt with the surprise golem people attack efficiently. When Tibbs had them past the first twitch, then the second, again without any changes to the path, maybe it had all been a ploy. Maybe it had all been a ploy from Ganny to make him doubt everything on this floor. Are we really continuing? Don asked. You can leave, Tibbs replied, testing the wall. If you're scared. I'm not scared, the sorcerer replied, but the time shield was close to a quarter left when we entered. Can we risk the delay? We know the way back, Jekyll replied, while Tibbs systematically tested each wall, moving them along. His team on the same tile he was, and we can easily defeat whatever creature the dungeon puts in our path. Your overconfidence will result in... The rest was cut off as the wall moved in place and knolls dropped on them. They won quickly and with a minimum of injuries. Then Tibbs reveal Tibbs opened two chest room in a row. After that, there was another attack which nearly killed Mez. Don stepped between the golem and Archer, taking the killing strike in his side. Mez's gratefulness made Tibbs sick. It wasn't like Don had put himself in that much risk. His robe had taken the blunt of the damage because the sorcerer had stolen Tibbs's trick of adding his element to his armor, so the sword had melted as it struck, making it even less deadly. And Don had probably planned it to happen anyway. Tibbs tested the wall, finding the one that moved, and 4 sections later, it opened to a room with a larger chest than the others, a dragon crest over it, and a switch next to that. We made it, Jekyll asked, "Yes, we made it!" He ran into the room, and Tibbs wondered if he should let him open this one and be reminded of why Tibbs needed to check them. But the fighter stopped halfway to it and looked at Tibbs sheepishly. "Letting my enthusiasm get the better of me again," he grinned. "Been trying to work on that." Don snorted. Tibbs ground his teeth. The sorcerer was getting on his nerve, which had to be why he kept on doing that. The chest was trapped, a simple trigger that activated when the lid opened. He neutralized it and revealed the content. 1 in 5 healing potions. "Do you think this one's random?" as asked. "Or is the dungeon subtly warning us about the next room?" "The boss room." Jekyll rubbed his hands together. "Big loot. And a harder fight," Commodore stated. When Don didn't comment, Tim glanced in his direction. The expression on the sorcerer's face was quickly replaced with a glare directed at Tibbs. Had that been worry? Probably as at how he was going to ensure he survived, even if it ended up costing them their lives. 3 potions each, then Tibbs checked the switch for traps before pulling it. The floor rumbled and shook. That feels close," Tibbs said. "That isn't a reason to be careless," Jekyll said, and the 4 of them stared at him. "What? I'm never careless." Don wasn't the only one to snort this time. They exited the room, and Tibbs examined the floor as they traced their steps. There were no surprise attacks, no blocked passages, and no new ones until they were back near the entrance, with the time shield having about a sixth left. Was it slowing, or did it not take as long as Tibbs had felt to reach the crest in the shifting wall room? "I do not recall the passage being here," Commodore commented, and Tibbs looked in that direction. They were a good way from the exit or the 3 crest. The new opening was 2 and 0 steps ahead of them, paces. Paces ahead of them. One of the many shifts we triggered but weren't aware to see, but weren't there to see. Must have caused it. Don replied with an edge to his voice. "Should we go in?" as asked. "The crests are somewhere in that direction, aren't they?" "This feels too simple," Don stated. Tibbs stopped himself from commenting. For once, Don was right. Ganny should have put something on the way. There were always attacks when they headed to the exit from the shifting wall room. "Maybe the dungeon knows that we are low on time?" Mez said. "Dungeons aren't that smart," Don stated. "Really?" Ganny replied. "And what do all the traps and fight and the 3 cash you missed, Tibbs, say about how smart I am? What about making you work for that conquest victory, Don? What happened to him since the last run, Tibbs? Know-it-all used to have a sense of what he was dealing with here." How had he missed 3 cash? 3 caches? Should he go back? If Jekyll found out, we won't know if we don't look. The fighter headed for the new passage, watching where he stepped and sticking to the sequence that shouldn't trigger anything. Tibbs hurried to join him and check for tricks from Ganny. Much faster than Tibbs felt they should, they stood before the 3 crest. They were gray. "That means they're unlocked, right?" Jekyll asked. I'm not dealing with more corridors after everything we went through to get here." "You'll deal with what I decide you deal with," Kenny said, as Tibbs did a visual inspection of each crest. There were no obvious trap, but he coated his hand with water before touching the lion crest. "Ice would be more efficient," Don said, and Tibbs made a fist as he stopped moving. Was he really suggesting he iced himself? Did the sorcerer have a death wish? I believe Don means that that as it will be more solid than water, applying pressure on the crest will be easier if you make it ice around your hand, Commodore said. "I know that," Tibbs snapped. "That's what I said," Don said in an annoyed tone. It was just his hand and the water around it, not himself. And the water around it, not himself. He'd made his sword and shield easily enough. This would Ice crystal formed in the water, and Tibs let go of the essence. Don't! He glared at Don, who raised his hand placatingly, smiling. No, it was a smirk. Don didn't smile. Jekyll stepped next to Tib. I'll press it for you. I'll press it if you. I can do it. Maybe we can have the other step back? Jekyll said, It's a lot easier to perform without an audience. Do I even want to know how you know that? Mez asked while Tibbs looked at the fighter in disbelief. Was he really equating making ice with what Ian Krosef got up to? You should have known me before I ended up here, Jekyll said. Don snorted. You were still doing that here. What? The sorcerer asked as he was stared at. Didn't any of you hear the guys talk about how great Jekyll made them feel and in and out of bed? How did your man ever think that was appealing? Jekyll snorted. Do you think Crow saved himself for me? Don, how about you don't put your nose in my man's business? Might be easier to do, Tibbs grumbled, if both of you stop mentioning that business all the time. I'm loath to agree with Tibbs, Don said, but you two are very free with your performing. Jealous? Jekyll said with a smirk. Of you? Don replied, his tone hardening. I will have you know that the women I have spent time with have only praises for how I perform for them. I can bring them to. Oh, shut up! Tibbs snapped ice over his hand and slamming it on the crest. I don't want to hear about anyone's performing. The click silenced the replies, then, with a loud grinding, the wall parted. The room on the other side was larger than any they'd come across, larger than the pool room on the second floor. The walls were decorated with etching that were too far for Tibbs to make out the details. That, Don said, sounding worried, is a dragon. He had to mean the only creature in the room with them at the other end. It didn't look that imposing, like a sitting scaled dog, but with a longer and narrower muzzle. Then he looked at how large the room was, how far the back of it seemed to be, and he had to reconsider how big it was. Look at the size of that chest between its legs, Jekyll said, awed. Come on! He ran into the room, turning to Stone. Don't! Don yelled, till smirked and followed his leader. If the sorcerer thought now was the time to assert his leadership, he was wrong. The others were right behind him as he reached Jekyll, then skidded to a stop as a ball of fire flew in their direction. Tibbs made a wall of ice, and it exploded on impact, filling the room with steam. Hidden from Don's sight, Tibbs channeled fire and wrenched the essence away from Ganny and reabsorbed the second fireball, before its heat even registered. Right, Ganny said. Really, Sand said. You've been sticking to water for long enough. I stopped thinking of what you can do when you channel other element. Still, she continued smugly, it's not going to save you. Tibbs channeled water and absorbed the steam. Between them and the dragon were over 2 and 0 creatures. Other than the rats and bunnies from the first floor, every other creature they'd fought was represented. With a whoop, Jekyll ran at the closest whipper, catching the whip and yakking hard enough to pull it off its feet. Tibbs made a sword and a shield and approached the rattling group. By the time he engaged them, flaming arrows peppered creatures, and he succumbed our fight a golem person before he had to focus on his problem. The rattlings were better than Tibbs remembered, but they weren't on his level. 1 sweep of his sword and 3 were cut in half. The shield cut maces and claws, and he barely felt the impact. When they tried numbers to challenge him, he iced a few and easily dispatched the rest. When his sword shattered on a knoll whose sheen through the fur should have warned him of what element it had, since he'd been too distracted to pay attention, Tibbs reacted quickly and was out of range of the knoll's swipe. But the front of his armor was cut, and Tibbs felt the tip of the blade move through his chest. If he hadn't had metal as an element, it would have cut him in half without the sword even touching him. When the gnoll attacked again, Tibs sensed the essence around the sword extend forward and he jumped out of the way. He rolled and reformed his sword. He used his own version of this attack. Stretched the ice blade until it reached his opponent. Something happened. Metal essence moved and the tip was shredded. So the gnoll was clever with its use of essence. Tim smiled. He could be too. He rushed, sensing ahead. When the gnoll used its essence, it was doing the thing it had around its body. But Tibbs took control of the essence, pulled, and coated his ice with it, so that the tip impact. Wait a minute, what? Okay. It was doing the thing it had around its body. But Tibbs took control of the essence, pulled. Okay. All right. Pulled and coated his ice sword with it, so that when the tip impaled the gnoll's chest, it went through the metal coating it too. His opponent's eyes widened in surprise. Then the ice exploded within it. Tibbs didn't have time to celebrate the victory. He sensed a golem person nearly on him, and he swung, only to have her jump over him, land, and jump again. Slices after slice cut his armor while he missed her each time. She moved too easily not to be using element, but he didn't sense anything. Was it one he couldn't sense? Or was she doing the golem equivalent of suffusing herself with it? Could Stowe get them to? Pain shattered his thinking, far too much of it. The sword was in his side. How could he feel pain from it? Metal couldn't hurt him anymore. With an angry snarl, he filled her with water and turned her to an ice statue. The answer was easy. It only looked like metal. If he'd bothered sensing it, he would have known it was something else. He pulled it out and suffused himself with purity. He was still healing as another golem approached. He visualized the line, the spiral, and in the appropriate places, and water impacted the golem, exploding into watery shards that left rubble behind. He stood and channeled water again. He dispatched a whipper, then a bunnyling, and quiet fell. Then a bunnyling, and quiet fell on the room, except for his team's panting. Dawn was by the door, but there was enough corruption in crumbling bodies. Tibbs couldn't accuse the sorcerer of leaving them to die. Okay, what you? Yeah, no. Commodore Mez and Jackal. Down potions, and their injuries went away. Let's get the loot, Jekyll said, turning to the dragon. Down, Tibbs yelled as the light essence formed into a line crossing the room in their direction. Darkness washed over them, and when it met the now visible line of light, they struggled against each other as if they were solid. Darkness lost, sliced apart, but it had weakened the light enough Tibbs didn't think it would have done serious damage if anyone had stood in its way. Commodore was on a knee, pale and panting. He pulled a bottle of blue liquid and drank. His color returned, and he stood, giving Tibbs a nod. All right, Jekyll said. Now we don't move, Dawn ordered. Jekyll stopped his turn and faced the sorcerer. I'm the team leader, Dawn. And you intend on leading everyone into that? The sorcerer demanded, pointing. They all turned, and a lot more creatures shimmered between them and the dragon. We can, Jekyll lost some of his bravado. Tibs? Mez. Come dar? He paused. Dawn? Opinions? They have the numbers on us, no contest. Mez said, worried. Do dungeon not always challenge us with what we can overcome? Commodore asked, equally worried. But it doesn't always do it the way you expect, Don snapped. This is clearly meant to look like a battle of strength, which we can't win, Mez added. Therefore, it must be something else. Tibs? Jekyll asked. He looked around for a clue as to what this was about. Tibs? The fighter asked again. I don't know, he snapped, then glared at the sorcerer. Tibs should have been the one to catch on. He knew Ganny. He knew she didn't go for the obvious. You... He closed his mouth on the accusation and breathed. We rushed in without thinking. We got overconfident. He looked at the horde of creature. I don't think we can fight through them, and I think that any movement in that direction will cause an attack. Jekyll nodded. So we retreat and come back to fight another day. They nodded. You win, Dungeon, he said as they headed for the corridor. But we're coming back, and that chest is mine. And that concludes Chapter 40 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story, it is up for free on Royal Road. If you want to support me and read ahead of Royal Road, that is on my Patreon. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the note. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.